Hi, everyone, and welcome to Founders Copilot podcast. I'm Jeff Hulett, founder of Personal Finance Reimagined. At PFR, we are obsessed with the journey of the entrepreneur. So through our Founders Copilot services, we partner with builders, business builders, to help them navigate the complex path of turning a vision into a sustainable wealth building business. Being a successful entrepreneur takes experience and vision. So with that, that's why I am so excited to interview experienced entrepreneurs to bring and share the business building secret sauce. We love the grit, the curiosity, and the systems thinking that goes into success. So that's exactly why I'm thrilled to have Terry Loebs with us today. Terry has spent a lifetime as a business builder. I am excited for him to share his experience. I have had some wonderful I've had long time experience working with Terry. I've had the great fortune of working with him back in the day. I ran a consumer lending business for what is now Wells Fargo. Terry helped my lending organization implement amazing home valuation models. But Terry's has a much deeper and richer experience that we're going to be talking through today. So before we dive into the nuts and bolts of business, Terry, I'd love to just hand it over to you. For our audience, could you just introduce yourself and give us a little bit more of your background?
Sure. Terry Loebs. I'm the founder of Pulsenomics. And for those of you who are not familiar with Pulsenomics, I could best describe it as an economics research and index product development firm. And we have special expertise in U.S. housing and financial markets, data analytics, and most recently, opinion research. And what we've been mostly focused on of late is developing authoritative household surveys. We also manage a unique expert survey panel, and we strive to create innovative indexes that are designed to quantify and monitor what we feel are attitudinal shifts that are pertinent to strategic and economic, I should say, business strategy and economic health. So that in a nutshell is what Pulsenomics is all about. The path to this point has not exactly been a straight line, but frankly, that's what's made life very interesting.
Well, and like I kind of introduced the ideas, we got to know each other in a different version of Terry, earlier Terry, when you were working in the AVM space, which I hope we do have a little bit of a chance to talk about. But, you know, when I look at
when
you,
we
Terry,
both had less gray hair too, Jeff.
A lot less gray hair for sure. Yeah. And I always tell people that was my financial crisis look. You know, the financial crisis pretty much made my hair gray. But anyway, that's another story for another day.
Yes.
So, you know, Terry, when I look at following you, we got to know each other, decades ago, but then of course we've stayed in touch over time, and I've been able to sort of watch you. And like you were kind of saying, it wasn't a straight line. So I've had the great fortune of watching that step in those different paths that you took. And I don't know if this is the right way to think about it, but I kind of look at your career path as, like, I call it the stepping stone career path, where it's like you've moved. Like when I look back at what you did, you were in mortgage trading way back, and then you had the great, I think the amazing, I mean, for me, it would have been amazing. I don't know if you agree with it, but to be able to work with a Nobel laureate economist, like Robert Shiller. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how can today's founders learn from this sort of mindset of sort of following your nose, improvise, adapt, overcome approach to your earlier career, and really thinking about how maybe some of the missteps, if there were any, how they helped you prepare for your later success?
Yeah. So let's see. That's some pretty fertile turf to plow there, Jeff. So, like you said, I guess my first kind of real job after college was on Wall Street, trading mortgage products, specifically whole loans and mortgage servicing rights. And I happened to jump into the market at a time when the RTC, the Resolution Trust Corporation, was in the throes of disposing of hundreds of billions of dollars in assets. And the trading desk that I worked on was basically responsible for bidding on tens of billions of dollars in mortgage loans and servicing rights. And that was my principal responsibility for a number of years, which, was actually pretty exciting time. But unfortunately, the firm that I worked for at the time, they weren't really committed to taking on the kind of risk that sort of trading entailed. It was very capital intensive. So that created a fair amount of disappointment and I would say disillusionment, because it was considered, at least in kind of the mortgage trading space on Wall Street, to be a very hot area. And although I was in the middle of it, I felt somewhat powerless to seize that opportunity.
Well, can I ask you a question about that, Terry? Just because I think of the RTC and those times and like other, even maybe fast forward to the financial crisis, but I thought the RTC basically was putting a government guarantee on the credit risk on those assets that were traded. Is that not true? I mean, were you taking large credit? Did they ultimately have to take the credit risk for that? Just curious.
No, we were bidding as principal. So, there was also, a liquidity concern too. So, liquidity risk management was not what it needed to be a significant player at that time at this firm. So, so that was, disappointing, again, disillusioning. I felt as though I was spinning my wheels a bit, or maybe more than a bit. That's, I guess, the bad news. The good news is that I really discovered a lot about myself. I discovered a huge market void that wasn't being addressed that I felt perhaps could be. So, for example, this position involved, as I mentioned before, evaluating the value of collateral securing, millions of dollars in mortgage loans and servicing rights. And at the time, there weren't automated valuation models, AVMs. There was no systematic and efficient and objective or cost-effective means to update the value of houses, which again is the underlying collateral for these assets. And you really need that to effectively, price those assets. So that was one learning that I took away from this somewhat disappointing experience, but it was an important learning. I also learned a lot about myself. I learned that I was able to work very effectively under pressure. I learned that I was pretty resilient, and probably, this is pretty intangible, but again, I think arguably the most important discovery I made, amidst the disappointment, and that is, learning more about what I want to do professionally, and also what I don't want to do.
Probably even more importantly, right?
For example, I knew that I wanted to do meaningful work, in the big scheme of things with, trading assets on a Wall Street trading desk. It's kind of fun. It's interesting. It's dynamic. It's exciting. But at the end of the day, you kind of feel like you're moving stuff around, right? You're not really creating anything, at least nothing tangible.
Well, you're making a market for other people to do that kind of.
Yes.
Right.
I wanted to look forward to going to work every day, which I really wasn't doing. I wanted to be the master of my own destiny, which I clearly wasn't. I wanted to, be a quote unquote player in kind of the mortgage trading space in this particular product sector I was involved with, but for reasons beyond my control, I couldn't.
Hey, can I ask you a question, Terry? Just pull on a thread real quick.
Sure.
You mentioned something about, being the master of your own destiny, like being your own boss kind of thing. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, I kind of bring it up almost as you got to be careful about that. And the reason I'm saying that is like if you work for a company, you have one boss, and that one boss is basically directing or you're accountable to, etc. But at the end of the day, for entrepreneurs, if you have 1,000 customers, you have 1,000 bosses. So you haven't gotten rid of your bosses, and you haven't gotten rid of the accountability to those bosses. You just have more of them. So I'm always a little bit like, be careful. You might get what you wish, but it just might be more bosses. But can you talk a little bit about, but I do think it's a psychological thing. Like, in other words, it's almost like a portfolio of bosses, and every once in a while, maybe a portfolio member leaves or whatever, and that's okay because you got a bunch of other bosses and they're paying you revenue or whatever. But anyway, I was just, it made me think of that, and I didn't know if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and there's no doubt that taking on kind of entrepreneurial pursuits necessarily involves wearing a lot of hats and answering to your customers, perhaps more directly than you might otherwise be accustomed to. But where I was really going, Jeff, with respect to kind of being the master of my own destiny, and it's a related thought, and that is wanting to have a sense of impacting the business every day, or being able to. So, you can still make a big impact on an organization without being the boss, right? So I just felt that, at least at the time, younger than I am now too, I just felt hungry for that sort of experience, and I would say, the last thing that I felt an urge to do following, again, this kind of disillusionment I experienced on Wall Street was I just wanted to feel like I could create, innovate, do something new, do something different, and also collaborate, if not with coworkers, with clients, and answer to the clients who actually want solutions that they're looking for.
And we bought more of what you were selling in the day, right? So you were doing something we really loved, driving down costs, increasing quality. I mean, it's kind of like the ultimate no-brainer, right? It's better and it costs less. So, oh, okay, I'll take more of that.
Right. So this is kind of an inflection point, or a stepping stone is this market void I was alluding to, the dearth of systematic process for evaluating home values on a large scale in an objective and cost-effective fashion. Basically had me take a pretty deep dive into a small company called Case-Shiller Weiss at the time. I think it was maybe a 5 or 6 person outfit operating out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is the early 1990s. And I started using some of their tools when I was still on the trading desk to basically better inform my pricing models and prepayment models and things like that. But I at the end of the day, when I decided to kind of transition away from Wall Street, I thought it would be interesting to work with Case-Shiller Weiss, and ultimately they did engage me as a consultant, and ultimately they hired me to grow the company and eventually achieve a liquidity event. And along the way, of course, I got to work with Bob Shiller and Chip Case and Alan Weiss. So
right. That's worth the price of admission right there, right? I'm guessing. I'm sure it sounds awesome to work with that level of economic brains, but yeah, I'm sure there were some interesting moments.
For sure. And it's interesting too, because again, the different paths that I had an opportunity to take from there include developing new housing linked products that ultimately, were traded on the New York Stock Exchange. We actually launched a futures market on the Chicago or the CME, which to this day, although thinly traded, still exists. But again, that kind of addressed my intellectual curiosity and my drive to just do creative stuff, find new solutions to existing problems that at least to date have been intractable. So, yeah.
Let me shift gears a little bit. And I'm going to go to a completely, we're talking about your past now, and we've had conversations, so just so everybody knows, but I want to shift gears now and look a little bit at the future. And the discussions we've had have centered around, artificial intelligence and, kind of almost like surviving the AI blender, for lack of a better words. And, you've noted, and I think this is from some of your survey work or just personal observation, that the youngest adults are surprisingly the most concerned about AI job security. And we talked about why that is so counterintuitive in some ways, and why, I guess the question, just to sort of put it in a different direction, is, how would you advise the next generation to think about that, and, how to be successful in a world that is clearly transforming, and it's going to take, for people coming out of college now or otherwise entering the job force, a lot of those jobs aren't going to be there, but there's going to be other jobs.
Yes. So just for some context, I've been experimenting with something I call the Animal Spirit Survey for almost the last decade or so, where, I'll go out and survey thousands of heads of household regarding their attitudes about a whole host of different things going on in the world. And one of them relates to artificial intelligence. A question I've asked for a number of years now is, more often than not, do new technologies tend to create jobs or destroy jobs? And up until the most recent edition of the survey, which was just this past November, the net feedback from all respondents was that, on balance, new technologies create jobs. This year, for the first time, that sentiment basically took a dive, where the net result was basically, the sentiment that new technologies destroys jobs. And then when I peeled away layers of the onion to just look at different cohorts of the population and how, their attitudes were different on the subject, it turns out that members of Gen Z were the most negative, the most pessimistic about the impact of new technology on jobs. So I guess that was surprising in one respect, and that is that, of course, I think of Gen Y as being AI native, if you will, for lack of a better description. Right. Just more having a greater tendency to embrace technology, right? One would think. The flip side of that coin is, it's a super tough employment market for, people who are trying to just jump onto the corporate ladder. So I'm guessing that kind of current, friction that influenced this year's results, especially for the Gen Y folks. I mean, my advice to young professionals is, I don't want to say completely unplug from social media, but maybe pull the plug halfway and plug completely into AI tools. If they spent a small fraction of the time that they spend on social media, at least my impression is that, if they dedicated that time to doing more productive things with AI and learning how to, use those tools effectively, they can be superstars within, larger organizations in particular.
Yeah, no, I'm 100%. It's interesting. I do as part of what we do, another part of Personal Finance Reimagined, we focus on financial education. We do seminars. I teach class, etc. And one of the things that we do a survey. It's an informal survey, but it's a survey where we will do, say, a group of 50 or 100. They're doing like an hour seminar or something. But I'll have them pull out their phones, and I'll do the whole, go to the screen settings, go to screen time, and just basically I collect their average daily screen time, right? It's just a number. And I do that across all 50 or 100 of them. So I get a nice distribution, right? It's basically a very strangely normal distribution, actually. But then we'll do the same thing. Well, then you can ask and answer the question about, well, what are you spending your time on, right? And it's usually a platform or, like you said, social media or whatever. So I'll get that information. And it turns out, and these are survey results, but me doing it in a seminar context. So I'm, take that as for a grain of salt. But on average, they're spending on average about 6 hours a day on their devices, and the primary thing they're on is social media, right? And so then I'll do the math for them. It's like, okay, that's if there's 7 days in a week, 6 times 7, that's 42. So it's basically your full-time job is to make money for social media platforms because they monetize on your attention. So, but what you should be doing is making money for yourself, and do it by focusing your attention on things that'll drive value for you, not for Jeff Bezos, not for Elon Musk, not for, whoever, for Facebook, for Meta, for TikTok, whatever. So, we have that discussion, and sometimes they're embarrassed about it. But it's an addiction, right? And so it's kind of like telling an addict, drink less. Well, okay, that's a great idea, but I'm struggling with that, right? And
Right.
I think you're 100% right. And it's like, how do we convince, people, I don't want to say young people, any people, that their time is their single most important investable assets, right? You have 168 hours in a week, 24 hours in a day. You got to sleep about 50 hours a week. So, that leaves you a bucket of time. Part of that, you got to work to make enough money to live, but that still leaves another bucket of time. What are you doing with that and that discretionary investable time? Say it's 50 hours a week, and most of them are giving it away. And it's when you put it in that context, right? And they'll see that and they're like, oh my God, like I didn't really think about it this way, kind of thing. And then they'll start thinking about it that way. But it's how do we, get people away from their devices, but to think about their time as the single most important thing, and how they invest it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for perhaps those who might be still intimidated by AI, I don't know, just focus on, if to the extent you can, uniquely human skills, critical thinking, relationship building. You're still going to need to build relationships in business, adaptability, but again, the big picture message with AI, embrace it. It can be so empowering. I mean, there is no more powerful way to break barriers to building a business than embracing AI.
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
amazing.
to
build a business. Well, it's funny. We have the Founders Copilot, and one of our clients introduced me to vibe coding, which I didn't really know what vibe coding was before. And it's basically where through natural language, through your language, you basically tell Gen AI what you want to build, and it basically builds the Python or the R code for you. It integrates with whatever the code, it basically allows you to create a operating proof of concept just through your description to what you want to build through Gen AI. So it's basically taken the cost of coding and just dropped it through the floor, right? I mean, let's face it, a line of code used to cost a ton of money because not because the typing was hard, but all the people you had to hire, and the cost of of disk space, or the cost of this, the cost of that, but it's now almost zero, right? And so the good news is you can literally build something that would have taken $1 million in capital maybe a couple decades ago. You can do it for almost nothing. It's crazy in a way, but that's the opportunity, right? And I don't know, I'm just using vibe coding as an example, but I'm sure there are lots of examples like that where we've driven down the cost of things. We can use artificial intelligence, and it's just like, we'll figure it out, right? Like,
Yeah, and I'd add to that, the cost of failure is a heck of a lot less, because you can basically know much sooner than you otherwise would, as to whether or not this AI facilitated business building exercise has a chance of success. You'll just know sooner. You will have expended a lot fewer, a whole lot fewer resources in kind of getting to the finish line. And hey, if it doesn't work, it's on to the next one. Or even if it does work, okay, I'm going to do another one.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news is you try it, it doesn't work, but you learn something, right?
Yeah.
You learn what, like you were saying before, where you work versus where you don't work, or what you want to do versus what you don't want to do. Well, it's the same idea, right? What didn't work? Well, that's good to know. Right. So yeah, so it's banking that learning, right? And using that learning to build your next thing. And yeah, it's interesting. So I wanted you brought up the words animal spirits, and I think of perhaps Adam Smith or John Maynard Keynes, but and I actually, Bob Shiller wrote a book called Animal Spirits, I guess. So so you built an index, and what I'm thinking back to, and we've talked about the Michigan, I guess it's, and I won't get this exactly right, but the Michigan Sentiment Survey that's been around for like 75 years, right? And so what I think about what you're doing is it's very entrepreneurial in that you've discovered that this very old index is just not working, even though it is powerfully entrenched. So the idea is, well, how do we create something that actually works and fills the holes, whatever they may be? I'm not saying the University of Michigan Sentiment Index doesn't work at all, but there's holes. And so it's like, how do you fill the holes? And that's, to me, is the nature of entrepreneurship. So could you talk a little bit about that? And especially I'm thinking about like around homeowner versus renter, because that's in your area of specific expertise. And what is the data telling you? Well, first of all, talk a little bit about what animal spirits is, but then kind of take us forward to, well, what does that mean to right now with what's going on with housing, affordability, et cetera?
Well, where to start? Okay, I guess, again, just to kind of set the table a little bit for, I guess, the viewers who are maybe just somewhat familiar, or perhaps have heard this term, consumer confidence, or consumer sentiment in kind of a economics or markets context. There are two principal barometers of the consumer spending mindset that are out there now, and they've been in existence since the middle of the 20th century, and they've not changed since, and that's basically to maintain the continuity of the index measurement itself. So just to stick with the University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment and focus on that one, this is an index that was created in 1946. It's based upon a household survey that's comprised of roughly 50 to 60 survey questions. The responses to 5 out of those 50 or 60 questions are then tabulated and equally weighted to formulate the index of consumer sentiment. Okay, so the index itself, again, is a very straightforward calculation. Something that's, it's a diffusion index, basically where the percentage of respondents who provide a positive response are looked at in relation to the percentage of respondents who give a negative response to each one of those 5 survey questions. And that proportion basically is what makes the index rise and fall. The challenge is, and this is, again, in defense of the University of Michigan's approach, as well as the Conference Board's approach with the Consumer Confidence Index, confidence and sentiment, consumer confidence and consumer sentiment, I mean, they're amorphous terms. So you can't come up with a concrete, indisputable definition of what comprises consumer confidence or consumer sentiment. What makes the consumer, tick? What I mean by tick is at any moment in time, what compels them to invest, save, or spend, right? I don't have all the answers to that, but I know that neither the University of Michigan or the Conference Board have the answers either. I also know that since 1946, the world, and in particular the US economy, has changed an awful lot. And the factors that make the consumer tick, spend, save, invest, are a lot different now than they were in the past. So, for example, you mentioned housing. Home equity in, I guess, 2026 is something on the order of what, $38 trillion or something to that effect. The bottom line is it's a huge store of wealth. Neither of these mid-20th century indexes gauges the wealth and the wealth effects of a consumer, in this instance, a homeowner. And I'm sorry, when I think of consumer confidence or consumer sentiment, if you're a homeowner and you have a lot of equity and access to a lot of home equity credit, should you choose to tap it, your degree of economic confidence is a lot different than somebody who is a homeowner who's perhaps underwater or a renter, etc. So, I mean, that's just one example. Think about also,
and they don't hit on any of that. I mean, it gets washed out, right?
Well, and so the University of Michigan, I think starting in 2007, they introduced a couple of questions regarding the housing market, like, do you think home prices are going to go up in the next 12 months? And if so, by how much? They added a few questions like that to their survey. But the index that gets all the headlines that everybody reacts to does not include that. They use the same 5 questions. And again, these 5 questions are relevant to consumer sentiment, consumer confidence, but it's such an incomplete picture. I think of it this way, Jeff. I think of these indexes, if you think in terms of like stock market indexes, they're like the Dow 30, right? The Dow 30 represents something like, if you look at the aggregate market cap of the Dow 30, it's roughly 30% or so of the total equity capitalization of companies in the United States, as opposed to, let's say, the S&P 500. I think of the Animal Spirits Index and the survey that I'm doing, which collects, just for context, more than 60 factors, not 5, 60 attitudinal factors that can influence whether a person is inclined to spend, save, or invest. So I think of the Animal Spirits approach as more the S&P 500. And anybody who's going to want to, have a real good and more comprehensive read on the equity market, they're probably going to look at the S&P as opposed to the Dow, right? So that's the way I think of it.
Right.
And, not surprisingly, we found in applying our animal spirits construct to this sentiment. I should say, when we looked at how the University of Michigan measures consumer sentiment, we actually simulated how those measures break down between homeowners and renters. And unsurprisingly, homeowners consistently across all 5 factors had greater sentiment, higher, more sentiment, more optimism than renters.
Well, and is it as simple as the wealth effect, right? I mean, if like you've got $500,000 in equity, you've got that sort of like just this store of wealth that's just there. And versus if you're a renter, you don't have that thing that's just there.
That's certainly a part of it. That's certainly a part of it, and there's correlation to one's income. Obviously, folks who are in, let's say, the upper quintiles of the income spectrum, tend to have a higher degree of economic confidence than those at the bottom.
So income leads to wealth, leads to income, kind of thing, right? It's self-fulfilling a little bit.
Yes, but with that said, it's not just about one's balance sheet or income statement. Our research also showed, in comparing homeowners versus renters, homeowners consistently in their self-assessments of their personal health, much higher. Their happiness, higher. Their level of anxiety, lower. Their degree of trust in institutions, higher. Their self-assessment of their degree of success in life, broadly speaking, for homeowners, higher. Their degree of retirement security, higher. So there are so many dimensions to this that, again, these legacy measures, they're not wrong, they're just missing so much. And that's even before we get into, the changed demographics now versus the mid 20th century. We have an aging population. You know what? If you're a retiree and one of the 5 questions that's going into a consumer confidence index is, do you think there will be more or fewer jobs 6 months from now? It's not really relevant.
It may not even care.
Indicator of that person's confidence. They're more concerned about whether they can pay for their health insurance. So you get the idea.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really interesting perspective. It depends on what end of the barrel you're looking from, is going to really affect how you answer questions like that. So let me, and we actually have to wrap up here in just a little bit. And I've just absolutely love this. And honestly, I could talk to you for another hour. And I'd love to have you back and we can continue this discussion for sure. One of the things that I think about, so I talked a little bit about how, we teach and we're multiple universities and high schools as well. But at the university level, what we do is we have a whole, really a whole module. It's over a couple of weeks on home buying. And we're a little bit different in that we focus on home buying decision making as a process, right? So, and we bring in mortgage LOs and realtors and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to get them to think through is the reasoning and using tools for the reasoning to help them. So one of the hardest things for me right now is facing them with a difficult challenge, which is affordability for you is completely different than affordability was for me when I was your age. And I'm sorry, it sucks, but it is what it is. So part of what we actually teach in the class is, what we call our adaptability concepts, which are basically coming up with different strategies that they can use to get on the home buying ladder. And really the whole point is get on the ladder. Right? If you're getting on something that's hard to get on because it's unaffordable because it's growing quickly. And could that change? Sure, it could. But in the main, in the United States, for a lot of cultural, government, tax, et cetera reasons, affordable or housing is still a great path to wealth. And I love hearing what you just said, which is the data in terms of confidence completely bears that out. So it's not just like an asset. It actually leads to happiness and feeling self-assured and to building better careers and things like that. So anyway, I just wanted to
engagement.
Right, like being part of your community. And what a wonderful thing. So anyway, I don't know exactly what the answer is in terms of how do you make housing more affordable. Actually, well, I kind of do. I talk a lot about zoning, which I won't do now, but everybody kind of knows.
Bang more nails.
Bang more nails. Absolutely. Mow volume. But anyway, well, Terry, it was so good to see you. And like I said, I'd love to have you back. I feel like we're kind of halfway through a discussion that is so interesting. And for me, what I'm hearing is somebody that has followed a path, but it actually was a path with lots of left and right turns. And I'm guessing when you were in your 20s looking forward, you didn't see a path nearly as clearly as you do now looking backwards, right? Like probably looking backwards now, it feels like a path, but when you were that younger person staring into the abyss, you were like, yeah, I have no idea. But you made it work. And I think that's the message, right? And that's super powerful. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us and with me.
Yeah, I would say it's normal not to know, where you're going to be in 5 years, as much as you probably, young people get asked that question during the interviewing process. But and that's perhaps uncomfortable not knowing, but it's also, again, it's normal and it's okay. And if you are alert and opportunistic, you'll find your way.
Well, very good. So, Terry, if people want to learn more about you or Pulsenomics, what's the best way? I know you have a website and stuff, but could you give us a little bit of contact and how people could connect?
Sure. Well, the website is probably the best way. It's pulsenomics.com, or to contact me directly, it's tloebs@pulsenomics.com. So very straightforward.
Well, thank you so much. And here at Founders Copilot, we're all about helping entrepreneurs, especially early scale and pre-scale, pre-revenue type size entrepreneurs. And conversations like this, Terry, it's so powerful to bring your wisdom and your background to us all. So thank you very much for your time, and I do look forward to doing this again.
As do I, Jeff. I appreciate your time.